Thanks to Iolo System Mechanic for sponsoring this video. Iolo has over 20 years of PC performance innovation, is based in the US, and has helped over 80 million people in over 33 countries. Their all-in-one PC solution boosts speed and performance, protects you from viruses and malware, and is your personal online privacy guardian. With one click, System Mechanic Ultimate Defense optimizes your PC and ensures peak performance. System Mechanic's Deep Clean performs 7 different tasks, including removing junk files, broken shortcuts, and bloatware slowing down your PC. Throttle up your processor's potential and reclaim valuable memory with Live Boost. Additionally, you get real-time virus and malware threat protection without dreaded system slowdown, and stop online trackers by simply toggling on fingerprinted protection. Included in the software is Bypass Password Manager. Keep your account safe and secure across all browsers and even be alerted if your credentials are found on the dark web. Iolo has also been rated #1 by PC Magazine 8 years in a row. Use my link below to download Iolo today. Get 60% off System Mechanic Ultimate Defense with 30 days of free 24/7 live tech support. Use code TheOperationsRoom at iolo.com/theoperationsroom. At 6:14 AM on the 7th of August 1942, Japanese personnel on the island of Guadalcanal and nearby Tulagi and Gavutu Tanambogo are awoken by a bombardment by US Navy cruisers and destroyers against suspected Japanese positions on the islands. American transports move into position to disembark thousands of Marines on Guadalcanal. But as the young men come ashore, they find no Japanese resistance. The arrival of American forces has taken the Japanese completely by surprise. For months, the US Navy's Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Ernest J. King, had wanted to take the offensive in the South Pacific. With the momentous American victory at Midway essentially eliminating the threat posed by the Imperial Japanese Navy in the Central Pacific, on the 24th of June 1942, Admiral King orders Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Ocean Areas, Admiral Chester Nimitz, to plan for the capture of Tulagi. However, when American radio intelligence indicated the Japanese were building an airfield on Guadalcanal, threatening Allied supply lines to Australia, the island was included as a target for the operation. To carry out the assault, the underprepared US 1st Marine Division is hastily assembled in New Zealand to undertake what was now known as Operation Watchtower. Now, on the 7th of August, Marines land on Tulagi, Guadalcanal and Gavutu Tanambogo. On Guadalcanal itself, the Marines face almost no opposition and gradually move inland, but on Tulagi and Gavutu Tanambogo, the Marines encounter ferocious opposition from the Japanese and suffer considerable casualties in grueling battles to root out the Japanese defenders. It takes until the next day for Tulagi and Gavutu Tanambogo to be finally declared secure. Almost all of the 850 Japanese defenders of these islands are killed in the fighting, with very few being taken prisoner. The brutal fight for these tiny islands north of Guadalcanal is a horrific precursor of what is to come across the Pacific. As the 8th of August comes to a close, the Allied position appears relatively secure. The airfield on Guadalcanal has been easily secured. Furthermore, Japanese air attacks against the Allied fleet on August 7th and 8th suffered heavy losses and in return only sank a single American transport. However, all this changes in the early morning hours of the 9th of August, when a Japanese cruiser force under Admiral Mikawa ambushes and devastates 2 Allied cruiser forces in the dark waters off Guadalcanal. 4 Allied heavy cruisers are sunk for light Japanese losses in what becomes known as the Battle of Savo Island. Fortunately for the Marines, Admiral Mikawa chooses not to exploit his crushing victory by attacking the American transport fleet anchored offshore. Nevertheless, with their cruiser screen shattered, Admiral Kelly Turner has little choice but to pull his fleet out of the area, along with a significant amount of the Marines' intended supplies, and 1,800 Marines of the 2nd Marines who have yet to disembark. With the departure of the transport fleet, the Marine commander, Major General Alexander Vandergrift, has just under 11,000 Marines to protect the newly acquired airfield on Guadalcanal, and over half of these are on Tulagi and Gavutu Tanambogo. With nowhere near enough Marines to form a full defensive perimeter around the airfield, Vandergrift decides to move 4 battalions, 2 each from the 1st and 5th Marine Regiments, to the coast to protect against a direct Japanese counter-landing. Vandegrift's only reserves are a battalion from the 1st Marines and a light tank company. Further inland, Marines' defences consist of only a limited number of outposts and artillery units. Compounding the issues Vandegrift faces, his Marines only have a limited supply of food and ammunition. If the Marines are to survive, by far their most important defensive asset is the airfield. Fortunately, in their retreat, the Japanese construction personnel left their construction equipment behind, and the Marines quickly put it to good use. Several days later, on the 15th of August, the Marines are approached by the British government's official representative on the island, Martin Clemens, along with some Solomon scouts. Clemens and the Solomon Islanders offer to scout for the Marines and provide intelligence on Japanese military activity. Vandegrift happily accepts Clemens and the Solomon Islanders' offer. Their efforts will prove invaluable to the Marines on Guadalcanal. By the 18th of August, construction of the airfield is complete, and it is named Henderson Field in honour of Marine Squadron Commander Lofton Henderson, killed at the Battle of Midway. 2 days later, on the 20th of August, 19 Wildcat fighters and 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers land at Henderson Field, much to the elation of the Marines on the ground. However, as the Marines do their best to secure their position, the Japanese are moving to try and quickly recapture Henderson Field. Shortly after midnight on the 19th, 6 Japanese destroyers approached Taivu Point, with the first 917 men of Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment 1st Echelon. Ichiki had been ordered, if possible, to take the airfield, but if his force is unable to do so, to secure his position and wait for reinforcements to arrive. Ichiki, previously an instructor at the Imperial Japanese Army's infantry school, holds a reputation as an aggressive commander, having commanded Japanese infantry in China, including at the 1937 Marco Polo Bridge incident, which sparked Japan's long war with China. Before departing, Ichiki has reportedly been warned there could be up to 10,000 Marines on Guadalcanal. Nevertheless, Ichiki has confidently asserted that his force will assault the airfield within 2 nights of arriving on the island. As his men disembark from the destroyers, he is supremely confident that nighttime bayonet charges, a long-held tactic in the Imperial Japanese Army, will crush any defending American forces. Vandegrift is aware of a Japanese move to try and recapture Henderson Field, having been warned by Admiral Chester Nimitz that radio intelligence had detected the movement of Japanese forces. However, he has no clear information on when and where the Japanese might attack. 60 Marines of A Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, under the command of Captain Brush, set out to destroy a supposedly small Japanese force reportedly positioned further down the coast. As they set off, Ichiki dispatches a patrol of 38 men in order to establish a communication post close to Alligator Creek. At around midday, just as Brush's force plans to stop to rest, Solomon's scouts warn of approaching Japanese troops. Brush hastily assembles his men to ambush the Japanese, who are advancing seemingly without exercising any caution. As the Japanese progress, they are suddenly met by a hail of American fire from their front. Reeling from the sudden ambush, the Japanese are unable to form an organised defence. The Marines, exploiting the initiative, move against the Japanese left flank, quickly overwhelming them. Only 5 of the 38 men of the forward scouting party are able to escape the ambush. When Brush's men later examine the bodies, they realise the men are from the Imperial Japanese Army, not of the Imperial Japanese Navy, indicating they recently arrived on the island. A Japanese map is found showing the Marines' defensive perimeter in great detail. Realising this, Brush quickly takes his men back to the perimeter. Upon returning, Brush informs Vandegrift of the presence of fresh Imperial Japanese Army troops in the area. However, the information Brush has seized does not tell Vandegrift exactly where and how the Japanese will attack, and without clearer information, he decides to keep his forces in place for the moment. In comparison, learning of the devastating ambush late in the afternoon, Ichiki does not take time to contemplate what has occurred, and instead moves his entire force forward. The following night, Marines of the 2nd Battalion 1st Marine Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock, are holding defensive positions along Alligator Creek. The Marines have placed a solitary line of barbed wire across the sandbar at the tidal lagoon at the end of the creek. To cover the sandbar, the Marines established machine gun positions and a 37mm anti-tank gun with canister ammunition along the western bank. Small groups of Marines patrol the east bank. In spite of the many warnings and Captain Brush's ambush of a Japanese patrol the day before, the Marines at Alligator Creek are unaware of any specific threat to their position. As the Marines prepare to settle down for the night, unbeknownst to them, Ichiki's force is quickly advancing towards their position. Earlier in the day, Ichiki outlined to his commanders that his force would advance along the beach, penetrate past the sandbar, and advance to an old Japanese construction unit position halfway to Lunga Point. From this position, his force would then move to capture the airfield. To the Americans' east, Solomon scout Jacob Vuza is searching for the Japanese force, and in the night chooses to stop at a local village to give them a small American flag the Marines had given to him. However, not realizing that the Japanese are already upon him at the village, Vuza is spotted by Japanese soldiers, who quickly apprehend and search him. Discovering his American flag, they proceed to interrogate him, but Vuza refuses to talk, and the Japanese tie him to a tree and begin mercilessly beating him with their rifle butts. They then stab Vuza's chest and arms with their bayonets. He still refuses to talk. Frustrated, the Japanese men cut his neck and leave Vuza for dead as he passes out. However, hours later, Vuza comes to and bites through his grass restraints and begins to stagger to the Marine perimeter. Even though he has lost a lot of blood, Vuza somehow manages to drag himself 3 miles to the 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, where, with the last of his energy, he warns them that the large Japanese force would later that night attack across Alligator Creek. Severely injured, Vuza is rushed to a hospital where he will miraculously survive. Sure enough, in the dead of night, just as Vuza warned, Ichiki's men move closer and closer to Alligator Creek. Marine outposts begin to hear the whispering of voices and the clanging of equipment, forcing them back to the west side of the creek. 2nd Battalion is now completely alert and aware an attack is likely. Bracing themselves, they place grenades and ammunition around their foxholes and fixed bayonets. As the Marines steady themselves for a possible attack, on the east side of the creek, Ichiki orders an attack across the sandbar covered by supporting fire from elements of his force. Finally, at 2 AM, a green flare is launched from the east bank illuminating the lagoon. As it eerily lingers above them, 100 men of Ichiki's 2nd Company launch a ferocious charge over the sandbar. Covered by machine guns and grenade discharges, the men of 2nd Company shriek the ear-splitting cry of Banzai as they launch themselves into the attack. The Marines immediately react, opening fire with their rifles and BARs. Clearly a major attack, American 60mm and 81mm mortars begin to pound the area as 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns unleash a hail of fire against the Japanese as red tracers crisscross the lagoon. As the Japanese continue to charge through the torrent of fire, the Marines' 37mm anti-tank gun fires canister rounds into their ranks. 122 lead balls scythe down groups of the onrushing Japanese. Despite the murderous wave of fire, the undaunted men continue to charge forward over groups of their dead and wounded comrades. Those leading the charge who manage to survive begin to pile up at the barbed wire a little under 30 metres from the Marines' line. Some are able to cut the wire or throw themselves over it. They charge some of the Marines' foxholes with bayonets and swords in hand, and engage in hand-to-hand combat. They are able to take a few of the Marines' foxholes. At the point of the Japanese assault, a 3-man Marine machine gun team desperately fights to stem the Japanese advance. Private John Rivers fires belt after belt of machine gun ammunition at the charging Japanese before taking a round to the face. As he lays dying, his comrade Corporal Lee Diamond keeps up the fire before himself being wounded in the arm. Taking over from Diamond, Private Albert Schmid continues laying down fire with the machine gun until a grenade explodes in front of him, sending fragments into his eyes, blinding him and throwing him back. Despite this, Schmid drags himself back into position and continues to fight back with his pistol. As the Marines fight the Japanese at point-blank range, further up the creek, a Japanese machine gun team positions themselves in an abandoned Amtrak. From this position, they bring flanking fire onto the 37mm anti-tank gun, striking the gun crew and forcing them away. With his second company devastated, Ichiki orders his third company forward. Just like those before, the men of the third company launch themselves across the sandbar under a blanket of fire, as the Marines continue to use every weapon at their disposal to stem the Japanese advance. Yet again, despite their furious charge across the sandbar, most of 3rd Company is cut down. Further up the creek, Ichiki's 1st Engineer Company launches an attack across the creek itself. Slowed whilst trudging through the water, just like their comrades, they too are smothered by a hail of fire and many are cut down. A few make it to the Marine positions on the west bank and are able to silence a 37mm anti-tank gun before being killed. Just behind the front line, Lieutenant Colonel Pollock is surveying the battlefield and decides to stamp out the Japanese gains at the sandbar with an attack by a platoon from G Company. The platoon advances and gradually roots out and kills all the Japanese that penetrated the Marines' position. Behind the Japanese line, the 3rd Company's commander pleads with Ichiki to withdraw, but he refuses and plans a 3rd attack. Japanese machine guns and 70mm guns move up to the east bank and try to pick off Marine positions. In response, Marine commanders call in artillery support and 75mm rounds begin to plaster the east bank. This forces Ichiki to move his headquarters back further behind the line. Despite the decimation of his force so far in the battle, Ichiki orders his 1st and best company forward for a quick surprise attack. Instead of charging across the sandbar, Ichiki's 1st company moves out and wades through the surf on the beach towards the American line. Ichiki hopes his 1st company will be able to outflank the Marine positions covering the sandbar. But despite his optimism, the Marines spot the 1st company wading through the water and prepare for an attack. Although the beach is only being defended by one platoon from Easy Company, as the men charge out of the surf, they are cut down by machine gun and mortar fire. Very soon, the Japanese attack begins to be saturated with artillery fire. A few men make it right up to the Marines' positions, but are cut down before they are able to reach them. In the face of the Marines' overwhelming fire, almost all of the men of the 1st Company are killed in the attack. With this, Ichiki finally orders the remains of his force to withdraw 200 meters back to a coconut grove. With sunrise, Marine commanders have no intention of letting off the pressure on the Japanese, and Vandergrift quickly agrees to a plan to surround and crush them. Later in the morning, the Reserve 1st Battalion 1st Marines crosses the creek further upriver and begins to flank around the Japanese position towards a beach on their far side. At the coastline, a group of Ichiki's men try to respond to the encirclement by launching a bayonet charge, but the charge is quickly crushed by Marine firepower. As the Marines gradually close in, some try to move to the beach but are cut down by rifle fire, and the few who make it onto small boats are killed by patrolling American aircraft. With the net tightening, in the afternoon, the Marines push 4 Stuart light tanks across the sandbar and into the coconut grove. Japanese grenades and mortar rounds explode all around them as the defenders desperately try to fight back against the tanks. Without any anti-tank guns, infantrymen are cut down trying to reach the tanks with mines and grenades. With explosions and tracers flying all around, one of the tank's tracks is damaged. Seeing this, the tanks position themselves together in a huddle to cover the escaping crew. Realizing there is no escape, Ichiki burns the regimental colours and takes his own life. Instead of surrendering, small groups run for the beach and water beyond, but all are killed. As the Marines move amongst the dead and dying, they try to render assistance to the wounded, but in their refusal to surrender, the wounded Japanese fire on the American medics helping them. As a consequence of this disturbing refusal to surrender, the Marines take no further chances. Just 15 Japanese soldiers are captured alive. As the battle comes to an end, the Marines are presented with the horrific sight of 777 dead Japanese men across the small battlefield. In return, just 44 Marines have been killed. Whilst a relatively small battle in the context of the ongoing Second World War, the annihilation of Ichiki's force contributes to the ongoing smashing of the sense of Japanese superiority that had prevailed since Pearl Harbor. The Marines are shocked by the willingness of Ichiki's men to die and to try to kill their enemies even when wounded. These developments would harden the attitudes of Allied soldiers towards their Japanese adversaries. While the destruction of Ichiki's force is a shocking blow, the Japanese determination to retake Guadalcanal would not wane, and if anything, intensify. For the Marines on Guadalcanal, there are many more hard battles to come. On our sister channel, the Intel Report this week, we're looking at how the US Marine Corps trained and rushed the 1st Marine Division to Guadalcanal.